Welcome to the Nova Data Platform Meetup for July 2022. I'm Tim McAliley. We also have with us Prashant Boyer. And Prashant's a cloud architect at Applied Information Sciences. And then I work for Microsoft as a, my title's wrong. Every now and again, they do. And I didn't get a promotion, but they just change titles, kind of like rearranging deck chairs. Not on the Titanic, but I'm just saying rearranging deck chairs. So my title is now Cloud Solution Architect hyphen Engineer. And that title is going to be in place until mid-April. And then it'll become just Microsoft Cloud Solution Architect. Not sure. I do the same thing every day, workshops and break fix and advisory type calls and things like that. All right. Kind of jump into the meat of it. We're going to go through some real quick chapter and PAS. I say PAS, and I mean it with, I should put it in lowercase, but it doesn't make any sense to put it in lowercase. Some general updates around the community. I'll just put it that way. Then we'll jump into the business proposal, the overview, and the feature comparisons of AWS, RDS, GCP Cloud, or Cloud SQL, and Microsoft Azure SQL DB. And I kept that narrow, right? Because I didn't want to go into the virtual machine comparison. I didn't want to go into the non-SQL comparison or the no-SQL comparison. I didn't want to go into big data and data analytics and data warehousing comparison. So it's very narrow in what I've done here, and I'll show you why. I'll show you the origin story. And I'll shut off the camera when we jump into the actual presentation. Some chapter and community updates. Again, we focused on everything throughout the year so far. We've done sessions on, I need to kind of mute somebody here. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Hopefully that's not me. Yeah, everyone's muted. Anyway, so we focused on multiple things. We've had a speaker from AWS. We had speakers to talk about Google BigQuery and AWS Redshift and Azure Synapse. So we heard from Bob Ward this year. We're going to hear from some more good speakers before the year is up. There's also the remnants of the PAS, Professional Association of SQL Server. They're calling it PAS, PAS Data Community Summit. It's going to be November 15th through the 18th in Seattle at the Washington State Conference Center. It's going to be just like PAS. When I say just like PAS, for those of you who don't know, PAS went out of business, I believe, in December 2020 because of COVID, right? They just didn't have enough cash for the books to keep it going. So Redgate took it over, but it took them a while. It took Redgate a while to get it sort of fully up and running and ready to go with some of the main PAS events. So SQL Saturdays are back. You can go to SQLSaturday.com and see what SQL Saturdays are available. You can go out to this URL here. And again, once we get into Q&A, you'll see me paste the URLs that were for this and URLs for some things I'm going to show you here in just a second. There's a code. You get $175 off your 3-day PAS Summit registration. For the chapter itself, we're going to be looking at a in-person recruiting event, probably November, December. Prashant and I are going to meet next Friday in Reston, because it'll be in the Reston, Virginia office. And we're going to talk about some of the options for what we want to do. We got one. We're going to find out if Reston, the Reston office will allow us to host a group type meeting, right? Because we're looking at probably 75 to 100 person event. We don't really want to go too much over that, because if we get really good candidates for this recruiting event, we want to make sure they have time to have some one-on-one time with at least 2 of the sponsors that I know, Microsoft and AIS, and we'll probably pull in Databricks. And so, and again, it's not an out of the box type event. If you're brand new to the database career, this is probably not the event for you. I'm just saying that to save you some disappointment. Don't feel bad. When I was, back when I just got my MCSE back in, in October 1999, I went into a job conference and I thought I was hot stuff. And this guy took me up to the little interview area and he asked me some questions and I didn't know anything. I was like, oh, and then he kind of told me, he said, here's what you need to ramp up on and pick a career path and interview for jobs along that career path. That was good advice back in 1999 and I've taken it. So if you're new to career, this is probably not the event for you because Microsoft's looking for seasoned people and AIS is looking for seasoned people ready to start, ready to get your orientation done, get your badge, meet your customers and start. Ideally we're going to have the event, so if you have a job right now, you be able to come and attend this event. It'll be on the later end of the workday, 4 to 8 on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, maybe even on a Saturday, but not longer than 4 to 5 hours of event. And we'll push out the date once Prashant and I meet next Friday, kind of just talk it over and see what Reston can do facility wise. And I've got my own schedule with work and school, and Prashant's got his own schedule for work and school. But again, we're going to have some reps from companies, and there'll be a big area where you can go out and kind of just browse and learn about the companies, and then maybe they take your information down and you get passed off to a more detailed interview. That's how we're thinking it'll work, and of course, it'll be a free event. So for 2023, just a quick note about 2023, we'll do a balance of in-person and virtual events. We notice that some meetups are meeting in person and also offering online. So, I like these online events because I don't have to drag in sodas. I don't have to get there at 10 a.m. for a 12 o'clock meeting. I don't have to meet the Panera guy in the lobby. I don't have to shell out 250 to 500 bucks for food that only, we had, 80 RSVPs and 20 people show up. You know what I'm saying? That's gone for right now. So we'll figure something out. I wish there could be a hybrid event, like bring your own lunch. We'll provide the beverages, but bring your own snacks. Who knows? I'm just saying we will do a balance of in-person and virtual meetings for 2023. They'll all be recorded. We will make sure that there is a virtual option if we do an in-person meeting. And if we do a virtual meeting, we'll make sure that it's recorded and all that kind of good stuff. Some upcoming meetings. Again, we did these January through the end of October. So the last meeting for 2022 will be Friday, October 28th. They're all at 11:30. Today coming up, we'll have a little presentation that I had to do for a college course that was interesting. I found interesting. Hopefully provoke some discussion and thought. But it's around comparing AWS RDS, GCP Cloud SQL, and Azure SQL database. And I'm trying to be as cloud neutral as possible. Naturally, I'm technology, not even biased. I just know so much more about the Azure SQL DB technologies that I have a technical leaning, not even a bias, it's technical leaning. But you'll see my proposal, which is addressed towards AWS, Google, and Microsoft service delivery and account executives. Hear us out, customers. And then in Friday, August 26th, we'll have a joint meeting because we have a couple of other meetups that are partners of ours, the AIML meetup. And we've got Azure Vision Services with Chris Sefirlis. Again, it's another AI type feature that as a data engineer professional, you're not really asked to kind of master this, but know about these types of cognitive services and your responsibility as a data engineer, a database administrator to make sure that the data backend for these services are running. So we'll make sure Chris kind of tweaks his message a little bit. And then really proud, we got September 30th, Pamela Hood. I don't know if you've seen her YouTube videos, but she's got a really good presentation on Azure virtual machine sizing for SQL Server. And Pamela Hood is a Microsoft on the Microsoft SQL Server product team, knows her stuff in and out. So really proud to have her. And then again, we'll wrap up 2022 with this recruiting event. I know this is Azure Data and AI Fest. We're kind of putting the AI Fest on hold for the time being. if you need to get any updates about what we're doing or next upcoming meetings, we generally keep the next 3 at all times kind of posted. I think we haven't posted for the rest of 2022. Go out to meetup.com /SQL. You can also go here to download these presentations. You can also go out to our YouTube page and see all the presentations, including this one today. If you go out to our YouTube page, make sure you like and subscribe. I don't really have a lot of time to kind of interact with comments and questions posed through YouTube. So I've got some contact information towards the end of this. But follow us on Twitter at NovaSQL. We at least post once or twice a month on meetings. Definitely join us on the meetups, and definitely like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Again, events, we've got the Nova Platform Meetup, NovaSQL, and then we've got the Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Meetup, and then there's a Global Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Meetup. So those 2 additional meetups will probably be paired together for the August meetup when we do Azure Vision Services. In October, I'm thinking we have there is a Power BI user group in DC, and a contact there named Shannon Lindsay. I haven't asked yet, but I'm going to next week. We want to leverage the DC area Power BI user group, and then the Power BI product manager, Alex Powers. And we're going to pull that together and have Alex do a joint meeting around a full solution around connecting Power BI to different data sources, namely Azure SQL or maybe Azure SQL Synapse for the October meeting. But I'll post that to you here shortly. Again, you'll see I'll paste this information into the chat. Matter of fact, let me do that right now so you at least have it. And then I'll get going with the presentation. Select all, copy, and yes, let me paste this in chat. I see where Prashant's posted some updates as well. So do take a look at the chat on Teams. And here it is right here. We've got some posts right here. And since I'm presenting, if Prashant, if you want to take a look at the questions, and we'll either take questions as we get them, which could be a thing, or we will kind of table and park them at the back end. But let's kind of go over what I want to talk about. And I kind of dug into the monthly updates a little bit more than I wanted to. Anyway, so what we're going to do is go through sort of a business proposal, and then we'll do an overview of the comparisons of the features of AWS RDS, GCP Cloud SQL, and Microsoft Azure SQL DB. Just a side note, just to let you know, this is not a technical presentation. We're not going to be doing demos and spun up versions of GCP and AWS and Azure SQL. This is more of a business proposal with a set of comparisons. And the reason I did the comparisons for the business proposal is to tell you, in my opinion, there's not too much difference between the different features for AWS RDS, GCP Cloud SQL, and Microsoft Azure SQL DB. There's other things that could make a customer happier and more successful that you could bring into fray, namely in-person technology services and cloud credits to give them room to do some operating on the cloud without incurring a cost. Those are the bigger things. And I've seen that in 2 cases anecdotally. It worked very well. The presentation origin story. How did this get started? Why did I decide to do this? I think, what was I forgot the original. Let me turn my camera off, only because I stare at myself while I'm talking. When I do workshops, I always tell people I'm going to turn my camera off because I stare at myself when I'm talking. I'm going to turn my camera off and get into it. So the presentation origin story. I'm doing a master's degree for information systems, and as part of this, there's an elective called Business Rhetoric, Expo 34, right? And this was tough. It is a tough class. I've done a lot of writing, and I've taken the class this summer. So it's Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. And I am done, right? I'm done. writing, and I'll just submit my final essay tomorrow. And I did part of this presentation last night to students in my class, and then my other classmates presented their side of things as well. But it's for the Harvard Extension School, and I'm getting my ISM Masters from Harvard Extension. Very, very proud of that. But really this deck it's a business proposal, and as part of the business proposal, there's a review of features and services and different cloud credit programs. And the thing is, what I'm recommending is an increase of programs that already exist at these cloud providers. Some cloud providers might have strategies about how to use what I'm proposing, or some cloud providers might just kind of wind up doing what I'm talking about, you know, or might need to kind of read through the recommendations and go, oh, let's do some increase of in-person services and cloud credits to kind of target a customer and make sure that we leave nothing on the table. The audience for this presentation, hypothetically, right? You know, who I would be talking to would be service delivery, like people who deliver services, you know, coordinate partners and coordinate professional services. And then account delivery executives for Microsoft Azure and AWS and Google Cloud. And then I'm trying to present this as best as possible as cloud neutral, although and I don't think there's going to be too many instances, but you might hear me know more about Azure SQL, but I'm not trying to say it's Azure SQL is better. It's not. It's just there's some key features, and I go through a subset of features, and I'll show you what I pick. So the presentation itself, we're going to talk about what is the problem, what is the proposal, what are the objectives, what is the service methodology, what are the success metrics. Then we'll dig into an overview of features, but it's a subset of features. We're going to talk about availability. We're going to talk about monitoring, and we're going to talk about backup and restore capabilities for AWS RDS, AWS RDS, Google or GCP, Cloud SQL, and Microsoft Azure SQL DB. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. So let's kind of handle the business proposal first. So what's really the problem, right? We want to make sure that the customers have these useful experiences and they get what they want from their cloud service. You know, we want to make sure they're satisfied. But then from a customer perspective, there don't seem to be any clear breakaway feature advantages. And what I mean by that is, oh my gosh, this handful of features is so far and above better than what a competitor has that we're absolutely going to pick this service unquestionably, along with other corollary services that also have to be just as good. And we're going to make this selection for our cloud service and our cloud service provider, and we're going to just run with it. There's some general things that might be preferable, but there really aren't any breakaway features. So I looked at a subset of Microsoft Azure SQL DB. I looked at a subset of AWS Relational Database Service and Google Cloud Platform Cloud SQL. These are all PaaS relational cloud offerings, right? That was my thing. I didn't want to go down the IaaS route. I didn't want to go down the NoSQL route. I didn't want to go into the data warehousing and analytics and big data route. I wanted to just focus on these three things, and I'll talk about why I selected these three. I mean, one's because I work here. To be honest with you, this is a third essay in a series of essays. This is the final essay, but my second essay started off, the memo started off as, let me convince a customer to move to Azure SQL. And then I started to think about it. You know, what if I was presenting to a room full of customers and I was a cloud consultant? I would say, hey, customers, I've reviewed these features, but I haven't found anything that's going to make you stick your stake in, you know, one of these cloud providers part of the field and say, I'm going with this cloud provider because of this handful of features that I think is cut, you know, far and above better than the other competitors. I didn't really see any of that. So I have some suggestions that I recommend for other areas around services and providing in-person services and providing cloud credits. And it really makes the whole feature by feature argument, which, side note, just a little bit internal shop talk, they tell us as Microsoft professionals, don't get into a feature by feature comparison with the customer. That is probably a less than beneficial path to go down because of probably this third bullet here, right? There are features that could be leveraged or maybe viewed from a certain context that look better or worse. You don't want to get into a feature by feature play with customers in general. Yeah, and then why are we comparing AWS, Google, and Azure? Because for right now, at least for the Gartner 2021 cloud database market, they're in the top quadrant. They're in the leader quadrant, AWS, Microsoft, and Google. I see Oracle up there, but I didn't want to mess around with Oracle. Snowflake is more data warehousing and analytical. And then SAP is its own critter. Databricks is its own critter. So I didn't want to jump in that path. Teradata, big data, all that. But I wanted to focus on cloud data around PaaS, relational database systems. And then here, we'll see this slide again. We will absolutely see this slide when we dig into the features. But here are the features that I looked at, and the categories. I looked at availability, which is really, how long is a system down per month or per quarter or per year. I looked at monitoring with an eye towards maybe a single pane of glass, but you also want accurate and timely monitors, the ability to have the thresholds that are part of the monitoring configuration kick off alerts, and those alerts initiate some type of action. I'm getting my doorbell's ringing. Hold on one second. Ugh, sorry, I thought my family would understand that I'm briefing some colleagues at a user group meeting. Anyway, so and then also sorry about the interruption. And then backup and restore. Are the backups automated? Do they have a type of transaction logging backup? Is there retention? Is there a point in time restoration capability? Without drilling into this too deeply at this point, I looked at AWS RDS. I looked at Azure SQL. I looked at Cloud SQL for Google. And I dug into availability, monitoring, and backup and restore. And there's nothing really that leapt out at me as a cut and above, far and away a competitive difference maker. There are different tiers, different pricing tiers for the different products that kind of really drastically change what you're looking at. For example, hyperscale for Azure SQL database, that blows away the CPU and memory and storage limits of the Azure SQL business and critical tier or the DTU tier, because of how much more storage, up to 100 terabytes of data for the Azure hyperscale, Azure SQL hyperscale versus 4, 8, 16 terabytes for the Azure SQL database. Oh, the same with our AWS RDS and Google Cloud. Just different tiers can get you different levels of availability, but they all basically offered 4 nines, which 4 nines is an availability metric that allows you to be down for failover or maintenance or rebooting or patching for 4 minutes and 22 seconds a month for 4 nines. So they all offered a 4 9. And then with Azure SQL, there's a bit of a tweak on that. And then with Google Cloud, there's a multi-region layout where you can get into reach that Valhalla, that 26 seconds of downtime a month and hit that 5 nines for Google Cloud SQL. But you might look at your budget and say this is not what we want. And then for monitoring, you want that single pane of glass. You want to be able to look at a portion of your cloud portal and say, what is going on in this instance with my data system? What's going on with my relational data, with my PaaS relational database? With AWS, you can dig into performance insight And then there's a broader tool, CloudWatch, that I have some links for. We'll dig into. With Azure SQL, because SQL Server has tools that kind of port back and forth, you can leverage things that are Azure only, like SQL Insights, Azure Log Analytics, automatic tuning, but you can also leverage um, the management studio and data studio type of tools, database advisor, or bounce back out to Azure and look at query performance insights, intelligent insights where you might need to drop or create an index. It'll tell you if you need to do that. And the same thing with Google Cloud SQL with their operations suite. You can also look at, query stats and things like that to monitor your Google Cloud SQL database. And then backup and restores. They all have generally the same. Google's a little bit behind. And again, this isn't really a detailed view of this, but Google doesn't really offer an out-of-the-box automated backup. You have to manually configure backups. They all have at least 35 days of retention, where Azure SQL, you can configure a 10-year long-term retention window, but out of the box with Google, the retention for your backups, the file area where your backups are stored, 365 days, and then the point-in-time restore for AWS and Azure SQL are both 35 days for point-in-time restore with an hour potential or data loss. If you're doing a geo restore, which is you're going to restore from a geographically displaced or distributed copy of from backup rather than a restore within your own, a region where the data lives actually. And then Google has a really cool thing. You can have a 7-day window for point-in-time restore, and you can look at stale reads and do what they call a surgical restore, surgical restoration of data that is in your transaction. So what is the proposal itself? Really, we want to make sure that the cloud experience is useful for customers. Again, you're seeing probably that point right up top repeated. We want to provide customers with free of charge, no cost, dedicated in-person technology services for a term, for a window, from 3 to 6 months for 9 months, so they can not worry about, gosh, I wish we could have someone do our architecting. I wish we could have someone help us with our designing. I wish we could actually have someone do our data migration, help us step through a pilot and a POC. And then tied with that top proposal, we want to make sure that they have plenty of no-cost cloud credits. So you can have the cloud operating room to do the testing, to do minimum viable products. You could do proof of concepts. You could do piloting. You could do your data migration. You could do your post-migration support without worrying about being dumped on with charges just to get there. And then again, the combination of these benefits, anecdotally, I've seen it really heavily influence customers because these seem to be the key competitive differentiators. I've seen 3. I've seen it where we lost business to AWS. I've seen it where Microsoft really won business by doing this. I've seen it where a third-party competitor, not AWS, not Microsoft, offered the customer, but it was for running Oracle workloads on Azure virtual machines, saying, you let us run it, or not Azure virtual machines, but just virtual machines, saying, you let us running in our cloud. It was IBM. Let us running in our cloud these Oracle workloads, and we'll staff it. We will run it for you. And the customer's like, okay, costs be damned. We'll hand you the business. So I've seen these combinations of things work, and they heavily influence customers. And what are the risks? Really, what the core risk, what this visualization is about is there's about 700 plus IT pros interviewed in 2021, 2022, and 68% of those IT pros picked misconfiguration of the cloud, wrong setup as being a security challenge, but I would even say it's an operational administrative challenge. because of staff not being properly trained, being rushed, not knowing what to do, not knowing the approach, and setting up the cloud service incorrectly. And I deal with this every single day where I have customers that maybe have something that they kind of stepped through and didn't configure properly. And because of that, they're kind of paying the price. We're trying to roll them back off of what they had done to get them going. Again, with the risk, the customer misconfiguration of a cloud service, they might not feel confident in using these cloud services. They become unsatisfied or they're already unsatisfied. You can absolutely overextend sales cycles. Why? Because you get into these endless feature by feature type conversations. You get into a lack of a definitive endpoint with the customer because the customer is not presented with a set of, to put it bluntly, binary options to proceed or not proceed. And you wind up bringing in sodas and sandwiches for 7 or 8 months, and they still don't go with you. And then potentially reduce revenue or no revenue because the customer didn't go and pick the cloud service, or maybe less of the cloud service because you didn't align it with credits and align it with in-person services. So some key differentiators: increase in-person technology services, increase cloud operating credits. All three major cloud providers already have these in place, and you could significantly, and I'm sorry, and what we're saying here, what I'm saying is that since all three of these cloud providers already have in-person technology services in place, already have a cloud credit program in place, I'm just saying that you need to significantly increase the levels of what is generally proposed. And this is not all businesses, right? This isn't for maybe, I'm just picking a company size at random, a 250 person company, you know, in downtown DC, you know, a law firm perhaps that is kind of, you know, in a, you know, they're loaded up with third-party software and they really don't have a good cloud strategy in place and they're just kind of muddling through. You know, they might not benefit as much, or they could benefit where you do provide some in-person services and cloud credits, but you do it at a much more compressed window instead of a 6 month to 9 month window. You give it all your best shot in a 3 month to 6 month window. So your increased in-person technology services could do things like do design and architectural work. And then concurrently, you know, because once you kind of pick the technology that you're interested in, these training and workshops are really important because they kind of put that anchor in the ground, whether it's AWS, Google, or Microsoft. You get that instructor from that provider in there, that content, those labs that the workers at the companies are allowed to do. That really changes things in terms of letting a customer see what you can do on that cloud and put that relational database workload in place. And then another in-person technology service would be the literal migration and implementation services of moving that data, getting that data configured on the target. Don't just show, and I've done it before, I'm guilty of this as well. Don't just send them the link to the data migration assistant. Don't just show them the documentation for the Azure migration service. Do it for them and have support so that you as an engineer, if you get into trouble, you have support as well. You have a network person, you have a storage person, you have an Azure cloud architect. Then after you do that migration, and this is important, provide that operational support. Get them situated, get them in a good steering path so they're being able to operate effectively in that post-migrated world. So once they're on the cloud, once they've got their relational data system running on the cloud, then they are kind of getting best practices from the cloud providers on how best to operate. And then increased cloud credits and cloud investments. More room, really, it's more room to do these type of activities without getting billed immediately, right? They can spin up a proof of concept. They can do piloting and testing. they can get some of that operational breathing space to deploy a workload on the cloud without getting billed directly for it. What's an expensive one? Yeah, if you configure some of our services, at least some of the Microsoft Azure services are very expensive. You can configure the wrong tier, right? Misconfiguration of a cloud service. A wrong tier gets configured that you're being directly billed for, and you could be spending 10 grand a month for that individual service. And I'm just thinking of a low end service, like a Power BI capacity. So for the business proposal, the objective, again, ensuring cloud service experience is useful for the customers to have a positive and measurable impact on a customer team's decision to migrate, to encourage cloud providers to substantially intensify their in-person technology service offering, and then to bring in cloud partners, which are companies that do the assisting to a cloud provider like AIS, right? Prashant's company, or Avanade or Accenture, and depending on the technology, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. There's all these kind of niche, large scale, but niche partners that do great work for at least Microsoft, I'm sure for AWS and Google as well. And then to encourage cloud providers to increase these free credits to customers. And not a reimbursement, but a free credit for you to do some type of tasks for a time window. Why do I say earlier, hand in hand, right? You want the services and the credits, because you want to have the services there so that the services team can see that the credit is being spent on the technology that was intended, that came in with the service itself, right? You don't want them to spin up some you don't want them to do Azure Site or Traffic Manager or something like that when it was about the Google Cloud SQL or AWS RDS or Microsoft Azure SQL workload. You don't want to spend cloud credits on things other than that. Methodology, have a feedback loop to make sure that you have satisfied customers and to adapt and react to their changes. And then your cloud provider, they need to kind of figure out, the monetary value, technical challenges of a customer opportunity, look at the customer need. And then the level of your in-person services and your cloud credit would be proportional to the opportunity. Like I mentioned earlier, that 250 person law firm, maybe they get this, but maybe it's a 90 day to 6 month window, or a month to 3 month window of very intense services. But then you're done. You're done as a cloud provider because you've come in to that small company who did qualify for the monetary opportunity, then the cloud credit opportunity, and the in-person service opportunity. They got what they needed to do done, but then you're kind of ready to move on to other things, other workloads. And then again, these cloud credit programs work in tandem with your services, so you can be on hand to direct the configuration consumption of the services. Here's kind of what this might look like for a generic database migration project with you're bringing in no cost in-person services and cloud operating credits. And and this is generic. I don't really have a company in mind for this, but it's a 7 phase, and that's about a 6 month project that's broken down by weeks. And then there's team members per phase, what they're generally doing, an estimate of what you would put out for cloud credits. You can even configure the cloud credits, I think, from the cloud provider side to make sure that the cloud credits can't be spent by any other service than the service you're trying to spin up. But there's always corollary services, right? There's storage and things like that long-term retention that you'll need to maybe spin up, so you don't want to be too restrictive. But project managers, architects, consultants, support engineers, these are kind of Microsoft, but also generic terms that could be applied as these targeted teams to do scoping, to do proof of concepts, to do migration plan, to do a pilot migration, to do workshops and training, to do the actual migration, to do the post-migration operational support, and then lumps of credits for the phase that you're in, with the migration, getting things moved over being maybe the bulk of the credit, but maybe somebody who was on another cloud, or maybe someone who has more experience with Azure billing specifically might say, no, we need to shift this around. But this is based on 50,000 in credits and how it could be allocated in phases. And the outcomes, you want, just from the top to the bottom, I won't go through each one, but you want to talk about scope. You want to talk about proof of concepts. You want to have validated plans. You want to have successful pilots. And then at the very end, you want to have a successful operation on the cloud. You want to have people who are living competently and satisfactorily on the cloud and ready to look at other workloads on the cloud. That's the main thing, is to have customers be happy with where they are, to where they have that breathing room to look at other areas to jump through. Some success metrics that we would look at, again, we want to have customers that are indicating that their cloud service experience is useful and they're ready to look at other workloads. The customer does the selection of the cloud provider's workload. That's the big success metrics. You get a measurable increase in customer use of cloud services, and then customers actually utilizing in the free in-person services. Why did I put that sentence there? Because I have seen customers that get $50,000 and a team of 4 architects to do. In this case, it was something silly. It was Windows 10 migrations, and because of the customer disorganization, they couldn't get that underway. They couldn't leverage the 50,000. They couldn't leverage the architects. They couldn't use the free in-person services because they couldn't get out of their own way. And then the customers increase their adoption of the cloud provider platform. They are able to think of other services that they use and bring those in. And then customers letting these workloads, the workloads that are configured with cloud credits, let those mature into paid cloud services. And then customers they would not only initialize intended cloud services, but I need to erase that bullet. Customers would participate in training and workshops and learn and earn technical certifications. That's a huge indicator of your maturity on a cloud provider, or any system, to be honest, is the level of staffing, the level of professionals, who's taken what training, and who's earned certifications. That's a big one. All right, so let's take a look again. I told you we would see this slide a little bit, and from here I'm going to bounce out to my my website, but we're going to take a look briefly at AWS, Azure SQL, and Google Cloud SQL at their availability, monitoring, and backup restore. And then we'll look at, for AWS RDS, we'll look at CloudWatch and Performance Insight. And for Azure SQL, we won't so much, we can. We'll talk about SQL Insights and SQL Analytics. And then we'll talk about Operations Suite and from the Google Cloud side. Hold on one second. So again, I'm just going to run through these slides super quick so that we can go and look at the actual documentation. Again, with AWS availability with the 4 nines, very limited amount of downtime. And again, that's scaled out in terms of the pricing and configuration and how much sort of administrative add-on you want to put on an AWS RDS instance for redundancy for the database, redundancy for the region that it's in, redundancy across geographical failover. Again, with Google availability as well. The Google goes all the way out to 5 nines with sort of a multi-region. And again, with AWS as well as Microsoft Azure SQL DB, you kind of get there as well, depending on the tier you want to jump through. Oh, that's kind of a little typo. I thought that I'd fix that. I'm sorry. But again, with Azure SQL availability, and again, this is a little bit of, this is what I know because I work in it, you can increase the tier, business critical or premium tier of an Azure SQL database and get that read-only secondary node. And then you'll have behind the scenes that you don't see 4 total SQL always on availability group nodes with the ability to actually route read-only traffic to that secondary node if you're on a business critical or a premium tier of Azure SQL database. For monitoring for AWS, Google, and Microsoft Azure, and again, we'll take a look at the documentation here in just a second. With AWS monitoring, again, with the whole purpose of, hey, I want a single pane of glass to look at my alerts, to configure my thresholds, and to maybe kick off some type of tasks that have to be initiated if I reach a threshold. With AWS, you have CloudWatch and Performance Insights. With Google Monitoring, you have Operations Suite. And then you have more. Again, this is really a Microsoft product per se. Relational database systems aren't Microsoft SQL specific, but Microsoft's built a lot of tools that port with SQL Server and have ported those capabilities to Azure SQL. That's a better way to say that. SQL Insights, SQL Analytics, Log Analytics, Automatic Tuning, Database Advisor, Query Performance Insights, Intelligence Insights. And then with Backup and Restore, AWS, Google, and Microsoft. Again, with AWS Backup, daily full backups, continuous, incremental backups. They do have automated backups in place with 35-day retention, 35-day point-in-time restore. Your Google backup, oh, I'm sorry. I should throw this slide away. But with your Google backups, ignore this. But with your Google backups, I think I can go back up here. With your Google backups, what you don't get is an out-of-the-box automated backup. You have to configure it, and then they'll be automated after you configure them. But the retention is 365 with a 7-day point-in-time restore. Okay, sorry about that. And then with Microsoft, you get weekly full, 12-hour differential, transaction log backups. Backups are automated out of the box. 35-day backup by default with a 10-year retention window you can configure, and you can do point-in-time restore for up to 30 days. And if you're doing a point-in-time restore from a geo replicated backup, you could potentially have around an hour of data loss, potentially. All right, let me kind of step through some things here. And again, at the back end of this deck, I provide references for high availability, references for monitoring, reference for backup and restore, and then reference for the cloud credit programs, the services programs, and the partner programs for all the different providers. But hey, let's take a look at, what is Azure SQL Database? Fully managed PaaS database engine that handles all that relational work, but it also does all the upgrades, the patching, backups, monitoring without any or very heavy user interaction, with 4 nines of availability by default, with up to 4.5 nines with additional configuration. And you can go and take a look at this link, and you can have the Azure SQL database. That is and this is me knowing what is available. There's a data transaction unit or data throughput unit, data transaction unit, DTU model, where you can have your database priced at that level, or you can have a business tier or general tier, different types of processor architectures and storage sizes for that. With 4 to 8 gigs, 4 to 8 terabytes in total available storage for just your Azure SQL database. And then for your additional workloads, if you need to put Azure SQL databases in an elastic pool, again, elastic pools for your Azure SQL databases don't help out with performance, but they allow you to monitor performance and set performance caps on the elastic pool. Then there's Azure SQL Managed Instance, which provides that SQL Server surface for you to kind of interact with the SQL agent and the system databases and jobs and database mail and all that with SQL Managed Instance. And then there's Azure SQL Hyperscale, which again throws tons of RAM, tons of CPU, up to 100 terabytes of storage at your data sizes. And there's also Azure SQL Serverless. If you need to have these spot workloads that might run 2 or 3 times a month, and we bill you just for the seconds that the Azure SQL Serverless ran. And then for Amazon RDS, there is a relational data service that you configure in the cloud. And with RDS, very easy to get started. You can configure SQL Server workloads, Postgres, Amazon Aurora, MySQL, Maria, Oracle with RDS. And then Google Cloud SQL, it's a fully managed MySQL, PostgreSQL, and SQL Server database. You can go out and configure this fairly easily and get some credits for doing that from Google SQL, or from Google, sorry. Side note, for professional services, Microsoft does have a huge professional services area for consulting, support services. I'm on the support solution side. Architects, project managers, sales specialists, and they're not there to sell. They're there to help you put your projects together and to help you implement. Same with AWS. AWS also has these professional services around consulting and architecture and support engineer. And then same with Google. Google has a huge consulting arm and as well as partners. So they all have professional services and partners to kind of put this all together. Now for the AWS side, for the Azure SQL database side, there is high availability for your Azure SQL database. And again, there's basic, standard, and general purpose availability tiers. It's really based on always on availability groups in terms of what's behind the scene, in terms of the amount of replicas, and also the amount of accessible replicas for read-only workloads. Again, with a premium tier and the business critical tier for the Azure SQL database, you can hit that read-only node to offload reporting workloads from your main database to your read-only database. For monitoring and tuning, there's DMVs, Query Performance Insights, Query Store, SQL Insights, Azure Log Analytics, Database Advisors that are in the Azure portal. In preview right now, there's Azure SQL Insights and Azure SQL Analytics that you can pull out telemetry on how your database is performing. And then the restoration of your database, you can do in-region restores. You can do restores from backups that have been done across different geographical areas. Go to AWS. And then AWS RDS itself. Oops, sorry, let me get out of this. Again, Aurora, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, SQL Server, Maria. And again, with these RDS instances, you don't have to worry about patching. You don't have to worry about maintenance. You don't have to worry about a server that you're interacting with. You're just interacting with the actual relational database service. For monitoring, for AWS, where you have just a single pane of glass that you want to monitor, they provide this, and it's all standard, right? You're looking at disk, memory, SQL Server or database related counters, so you can set baselines, backing up and restoring an RDS instance. Again, very similar to what you have available with Azure SQL, but you don't get the 10-year retention window. CloudWatch is a monitoring utility for Amazon, in general for AWS. And then AWS RDS Performance Insight is what you would take a look at if you need to do any deep dive database tuning. Then for the Google side, with Google for high availability, there's multi-regional primary and standby instances with synchronous replication between these instances. You can monitor these instances with the Google Cloud Watch or Google Cloud Console and cloud monitoring. And we'll get more into monitoring in a second. And then with your Cloud SQL backups, again, you have to configure this, meaning when you configure an Amazon RDS instance or you configure a Microsoft Azure SQL instance, backups run automatically. You didn't have to do a thing. You've just configured your database. With Google Cloud SQL, you have to configure it. You have to kick it on, and then it'll start running for you. And then there is a Google Cloud Operations Suite, formerly from Stackdriver, that will let you look at how things are running on your cloud overall. And there's also Google SQL Cloud or Google SQL metrics to tell you how your Google Cloud SQL database is running, things you might have to react to. And then there's also things like other tools to look at, like query stats and things of that nature. So what and that was just a quick review of the tools and the systems and the backups and the high availability. Are there any questions out there? Any questions about anything at all? Oh. Ooh, lots of questions. Let's see, I'll just start at the bottom here. I'll start with George. In some scenarios, using overseas data centers provides greater protection for your data. Will you provide, yeah, maybe I could, for this presentation, I'm done with this class, George. So I didn't want to go into pricing because that's like a feature, and pricing some aspects of what you configure, like certain high availability or overseas data centers, you could get into wild pricing swings. Let's see. I know 5.9s used to be important with on-prems, but it's irrelevant with the cloud. Yes, kind of, right? Because you want to say, here's what we can expect. The 9s tie in with the service level agreement. With the service level agreement, that's what we are trying to agree to and promise with our SLA. So that's what we focus on, the 9s. Let's see, Chris. There are different zones around the world. I'm told to use my own zone. Other zones. Okay, looks like a. Let's see. Looks like we had some good conversation here. Let me. Yep, I saw. Just FYI, Microsoft. I didn't want to cover Oracle because Oracle's its own beast, database wise. But Microsoft does have a partnership with Oracle for supporting Oracle workloads in the Azure cloud. How did I verify these features? I created an account, have an Azure account, I have an AWS account, I have a Google account. I created US instances, all US East type instances, and I didn't create any type of multilingual instances. And I'm not working in any kind of overseas capacity. Did I compare hot and cold backups? I'm imagining that cold backups mean archive or deep retention. Azure SQL has that 10-year long-term retention window. You can configure retention for 365 days out of the box. With Google, AWS, you can configure longer term as well. Why do you features is not something discussed? Okay. Okay, this looks like more of a discussion between two colleagues. All right, guys, let's see. Okay, guys. So do we have any other questions?
The features was a question for you, Tim. I just, how can you give the customer the best solution without knowing the features? I mean, the cloud is just so complex. I don't know how you can't have that discussion.
Oh, I didn't say you couldn't. I'm just saying what I did for the purpose of this paper, for the purpose of the presentation. I picked three technologies from each of the a technology from each of the cloud providers and three subsets of these features. Absolutely. So you would need to know a breadth of these features. I'm not saying you would take these features and sell them to the customer and not talk about the other features at all. No, 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 no. I'm just saying the customers in general, as I've experienced, don't see a feature by feature comparison is tremendously beneficial, whereas cloud credits and in-person services to help them actually do the work is more beneficial. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you would absolutely need to know the features in a real customer environment. For the purpose of this paper that I did, and for purposes of this for the presentation, I needed to kind of narrow things down. Otherwise, it would have been instead of 1,800 words, it would have been 50,000 words. Oh, thank you, Steve. Thank you. I graduate in the spring 2023. All right, guys. I'm gonna hit stop on the record unless there's any questions. Okay, I'm gonna hit stop on recording, and I'll post this up on YouTube.